The air inside the courtroom felt thick, almost suffocating. Cameras weren't allowed, but the silence said more than any lens ever could. Not the silence of boredom. This was the kind of silence that arrives before something historic, like a breath being held by everyone at once. No one had expected it, but there he was, Ben Affleck, the last person anyone thought would be connected to this case. He walked in looking composed, coached, calm. But behind those eyes there was something deeper, something pressed against his ribs like a truth that didn't want to stay buried. As he raised his hand for the oath, even the judge leaned in, something that almost never happens. Reporters stiffened, courtroom sketch artists dropped their pencils mid-stroke. What was happening now wasn't just a trial, it was something bigger. Something that had nothing to do with movies anymore. This wasn't a Hollywood drama. This was raw. His name hadn't been mentioned once in the Diddy proceedings until now. When news of his subpoena broke earlier that week, everyone thought it was just noise, another headline for distraction. But the moment he opened his mouth, the entire room shifted. He was here because of something he heard, something that took place at a private event years ago, something involving Diddy and Jennifer Lopez. People thought they knew the story. The rekindled romance, the surprise wedding, the glowing photo shoots. But behind the glitter, something darker had always been. Whispering, Ben Affleck said he overheard a conversation. He didn't mean to, he had stepped out for air. The wine had been flowing, music in the background. And then voices. He was close enough to hear, just enough. What he remembered changed everything. He said Diddy made a comment about the files. Files Jennifer allegedly knew existed. Files she may have helped disappear. She asked him, "Are they gone for good?" And Diddy answered, "Only if nobody talks." No one moved. No one breathed. Ben's voice never cracked, but it softened, like he hated repeating it out loud. You could see the conflict on his face. Maybe it was guilt, maybe fear, maybe something he'd been carrying around for years and finally had no choice but to spill. But his words landed like a sledgehammer. The prosecution leaned forward. "Mr. Affleck, do you believe Jennifer Lopez was aware of criminal activities related to Mr. Combs?" Ben paused, closed his eyes, just for a moment. "I don't know what she knew," he said. "I just know what I heard, and that was enough." The judge called a recess. The prosecution requested a review of the transcript. And within the hour, the courtroom exploded. A sudden order was issued. Jennifer Lopez was now officially under federal investigation. Gasps broke out like fireworks. Phones lit up across the room. Outside, chaos. Reporters sprinted through the courthouse halls. The story was moving like fire. 1 second ago it was about Diddy. Now it was about JLo. It was no longer a scandal, it was a collapse, a reckoning. A toppling of names the public thought were untouchable. Social media went into meltdown. Jennifer Lopez under investigation trended worldwide. Fans were stunned, divided. Some refused to believe it, others had been waiting for this moment for years, but inside, the courtroom remained ice cold. The judge had not issued an arrest warrant yet. What was filed was an emergency inquiry, an immediate authorization to dig. Emails, call logs, financial transactions, evidence tampering. If anything surfaced, the inquiry would escalate. Diddy sat motionless, not a flicker of surprise on his face. As if he'd expected this, as if the walls falling in weren't new to him. This wasn't panic, it was calculation. The prosecution returned with evidence. First, a decrypted message from a former employee's device. J doesn't want it on her. D says it's handled. No names, just initials. But the context spoke for itself. J, who else could it be? Jennifer's name, now echoing through the courtroom like a ticking clock. Handled. How? Deleted. Hidden. Destroyed. The message had no answers, just smoke. But the fire was catching on. Jennifer's legal team rushed a denial. A strongly worded statement calling the claims baseless and defamatory. But the courtroom had already moved on, because now it wasn't about whether she did something. It was about how close she stood to the people who did. The prosecutors projected old photos, galas, fundraisers, music events where Lopez and Diddy appeared, side by side, long after their romance was supposedly over. Then came statements from former associates, people who said her name came up often. Whenever there was a cleanup, whenever plans needed to shift, the implication was brutal. Jennifer wasn't just someone who used to be close to Diddy. She might have been someone who helped protect him. And then, in the far corner of the gallery, a journalist whispered into her phone, "This is bigger than Diddy. This is the whole tower coming down." Because once you link someone like Jennifer Lopez to something like this, it's no longer about one man's crimes. It's about the system that let it happen. They used to smile in public, glowing, glamorous, untouchable, but behind closed doors, their whispers built walls around secrets. They weren't the ones pulling the trigger, but they were in the room while it was loaded. And now, Jennifer Lopez's name wasn't in the credits. It was in the case file. The end of her story hadn't been written yet, but the silence surrounding her was starting to crack. For days, her legal team stayed quiet. They pushed out hollow press releases, trying to paint the court's revelations as clickbait. But away from the cameras, everything changed. Her publicist canceled press appearances. Tour dates vanished from websites without explanation. And most revealing of all, her attorneys filed an emergency motion to seal certain documents from public access. The prosecution didn't flinch. They rolled out what they called a cultural map. It looked like a conspiracy diagram straight from a crime thriller. Names, events, timelines, properties. In the middle, Diddy, but close to him, almost parallel, was another name, smaller, but circled in bold. Jennifer Lopez. The jury leaned forward. The prosecution narrated the map like a story. These weren't smoking guns, they were breadcrumbs, clues, subtle indicators that while she might not have been in the spotlight, she was always just off stage, watching it all unfold. Then came the emails, not directly from Lopez, but from her inner circle handlers, reps, consultants. Messages that didn't scream guilt, but whispered strategy. If this goes south, one said, keep Jay completely insulated. No statements, no photo access, control the narrative. Another, more chilling, under no circumstance should she be linked to the Vault Night. That name, Vault Night, had triggered a storm. It referred to a secret evening insiders only spoke about in code. The night Jamie Foxx's recordings were reportedly backed up and moved. The same night when multiple digital devices disappeared from Diddy's compound. And now there was proof. Lopez's team knew about it. They weren't asking what happened. They were strategizing around it. Still, none of this hit as hard as what came next. Another deposition. This time, not in the courtroom but played on a screen. Ben Affleck again, alone. No Hollywood charm. No defense attorneys. Just his hands clasped, jaw tight, voice low. He said during a trip to Miami, Lopez wasn't herself. She was distracted, anxious. She stepped away for a call. When she came back, she looked at him and asked, if I knew something bad, would you still protect me? Ben didn't flinch in the video. He looked straight into the lens and said, at the time, I thought she was being emotional. Now, I'm not so sure. That moment cracked everything wide open. It wasn't a passive Jennifer. It was Jennifer with questions, with doubts, maybe even knowledge. And the implication wasn't that she was a victim of chaos, but that she'd chosen to stay close to it. You could feel it. A journalist dropped his pen. A woman in the back whispered, oh my God, because that's what silence becomes when it stretches too long. It becomes a choice. And choices have consequences. The prosecution ended the day without theatrics. No pounding on the podium. Just one calm statement. We are not alleging Jennifer Lopez committed a crime. We are showing you that when powerful people share dangerous spaces, silence is a decision. But outside, silence was over. Protesters began to swarm. Some shouted that Lopez was being scapegoated. Others held signs saying, "Justice has no list." Either way, the public had spoken. Jennifer Lopez, the queen of red carpets, Super Bowl stages, love songs, was now standing on a cliff no choreography could spin her away from. Secrets don't care about celebrities. And silence. It always finds a way to speak. By the time court resumed, the air had shifted. The tension was still there, but now it was heavier, thicker, as if something irreversible had already begun. Then, the prosecution dropped a curveball, a journal. Not from a celebrity, not from a whistleblower, but from a former assistant inside Diddy's mansion, a woman who remained anonymous, but who turned over handwritten pages documenting the chaos behind closed doors. Most entries were routine: scheduling, deliveries, party setups, but one entry, 2 years old, stopped everything. It read, "JLo came by today." Not a public thing. No cameras. She met with Diddy alone for over 40 minutes. After she left, he told me she's worried. I told her she's fine as long as she remembers who protected her first. I don't know what that meant, but the air felt heavy that day. The gallery went still. You could feel every heartbeat in the room. A private moment, now weaponized in court. A quiet sentence about worrying was no longer just emotion. It was evidence. The prosecution laid out a 3-part theory. Proximity. She wasn't in the dark. She was in the room, on the planes. Part of the calls. Access. Her team was involved in media control, file movement, and digital suppression. Fear. Confirmed by Affleck's video. The journal. The internal messages. Jennifer Lopez had everything to lose. $1 billion brand. A spotless legacy. Generations of fans who saw her as untouchable. So why stay close to someone like Diddy? Why risk it all? The prosecution didn't answer. They didn't have to. The jury was already asking the same question in their own heads. The defense lashed back. They said everything was circumstantial. That Jay could mean someone else. That the assistant's notes were just feelings, not facts. That Affleck was emotional, not evidential. But nothing could stop the unraveling now, because this wasn't about proving Jennifer Lopez broke the law. It was about proving she knew and stayed anyway. And that's when the real bomb dropped. The judge revealed that Lopez's team had just filed a private motion, a sealed request for an emergency meeting with the court, a move to clarify her involvement before a formal warrant could be considered. Translation: she blinked. The icon, who never flinched, never folded, now whispering behind closed doors, asking for privacy. From a storm she claimed she was never part of, the gallery exploded. Legal commentators were already calling it a preemptive shield. Others called it something simpler: damage control. Inside, the prosecution stayed quiet. No celebration, no ego, just a pause and a glance at the jury. Because at this point, the evidence wasn't the loudest part of the trial. The silence was. Jennifer Lopez wasn't a background character anymore. She was part of the narrative, in the orbit of one of the most catastrophic celebrity implosions in decades. And now, finally feeling the heat, somewhere along the way, she made the fatal mistake that every protected star makes. She stayed too close, for too long, and thought the spotlight would keep her safe. But the courtroom didn't care about fame. It only cared about one thing. What did you know, and when did you choose to stay silent? The energy turned almost spiritual. The gallery wasn't watching a trial anymore. They were witnessing a confession unravel itself without a single guilty plea. It was about culture now, a world where silence in an accident. It's a currency, a weapon, a shield. The prosecution walked back up. No drama. Just a single phrase. Not all accomplices act. Some protect by staying quiet. Then came the witness, a digital consultant, remote, face blurred, voice distorted. But her words were sharp, blistering. I was hired to wipe data, she said. Not destroy it, encrypt it, hide it. I didn't always know why. But one name kept coming up, Diddy. And then, the hammer drop. In one meeting, there was panic. I was told, and I quote, "Make sure nothing ties back to Jay, not a text, not a timestamp, not a shadow." That came from someone representing Jennifer Lopez. The courtroom didn't gasp. It collapsed, because this wasn't hearsay. This was protocol, strategy, a system, not a slip-dash-up. Screenshots followed, metadata, logs, geolocation removals, social media wipes, all perfectly legal in isolation but damning in context, especially when paired with the final piece, a confidential recording. To media lawyers, one music exec, caught in a federal sting. But now, part of this case, if this blows up, one voice said, Jay's the only one clean enough to survive it. Use Affleck if we have to. Keep her out of court, no names. Just a cold, quiet implication. Jennifer Lopez wasn't just another celebrity in the room. She was a firewall, the final defense against the collapse of a legacy machine. Whether she wanted it or not, her name was part of the system now, a clean image repurposed into camouflage. And the mask was slipping. By evening, cable news melted down, hashtags exploded, and the Lopez brand, once built on stage lights and red carpets, now sat at the heart of a courtroom, waiting for the next blow. A journalist summed it up best with a tweet. She spent her whole life chasing the spotlight, but now, the shadows are louder, and the court wasn't done. Because the question now wasn't whether Jennifer Lopez knew. It was whether she helped build the thing she was now pretending to run from. A thunderclap loud, sudden, impossible to ignore. The courtroom, once buzzing with tension, now felt like it was holding its breath. For the first time since the trial began, Jennifer Lopez was on her way. Outside, the crowd swelled. People rushed barricades, police held lines, camera crews adjusted angles, and a tidal wave of speculation erupted online. Was she coming to testify, to deny, to negotiate? No one knew. But one thing was clear: she was no longer a myth, a silent echo behind legal teams and PR statements. She was becoming real in this trial, a physical presence in a narrative she could no longer float above. Back inside, the prosecution stood quietly, waiting. The timeline projection still glowed faintly on the courtroom wall, casting long shadows over the jury box. And when the double doors opened and she entered, not with paparazzi flair, but with the solemn posture of someone stepping into history, the room fell into a silence so dense it swallowed sound. Jennifer Lopez walked slowly, deliberately, wearing a gray suit so plain it felt like strategy. No diamonds, no entourage, just her and a lawyer half a step behind. She didn't speak. She didn't look at the gallery. She sat in that once empty chair and folded her hands. For a second, the courtroom simply stared. This wasn't the Jennifer Lopez of music videos, red carpets, or global superstardom. This was the Jennifer Lopez behind the curtain, the one the prosecution claimed had seen, heard, and protected everything. The judge nodded, signaled for proceedings to resume, and the prosecution wasted no time. They played one final piece of audio. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't scandalous. It was quiet Jennifer speaking to someone backstage, likely at a Diddy-sponsored event, just a few years ago. "They'll come for him one day," she said. "Just make sure none of it traces back to brand partners. Brand partners." That word cracked something open, not just in the case, but in the narrative around her. Because it meant she wasn't just protecting a man. She was protecting an empire, her image, her money, and herself. The cross-examination was set to begin the next day. But at that moment, no one was thinking about legal strategy. They were thinking about loyalty, about silence, about complicity. The crowd outside had been cheering when she arrived. Now, they were confused, unsettled, holding their phones up not to celebrate her presence, but to record history as it unraveled. And inside the courtroom, the story was no longer about what Diddy had done alone. It was about how many people had helped him get away with it. The words hit like a shockwave. She's coming. Jennifer Lopez was coming. Not a statement. Revelation. A turning point. Within seconds, the courtroom's oxygen changed. Her lawyers had confirmed that she would appear the next morning, not to testify, not to explain, just to be seen. And that alone shifted the entire case. This wasn't about Diddy anymore. It wasn't about a scandal. It was about power. A power so polished it became invisible, the kind of power that walks carpets, signs checks, and disappears before responsibility shows up. For 20 years, Jennifer Lopez had been untouchable, Teflon-coated in charm and choreography. She was the loophole, the clean exit, the last one standing when the flames died out. But when she walked into that courtroom, she wasn't walking toward a verdict, she was walking straight into the storm her silence had built. Not with designer heels, not with flashbulbs, but with the weight of everything she never said. The door creaked. The air stalled, and Jennifer Lopez stepped through. No glam squad. No handlers. No Hollywood glow. Just a black suit, a pale face. A silence that screamed. Every eye followed her. The judge waited, just a beat longer than usual, letting the truth of her presence sink in. She sat, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. And suddenly, the whole courtroom felt off balance. Not because she was guilty, but because maybe she was never innocent. The prosecution didn't pause for her entrance. They continued, relentlessly, precise. Today's target. The money, a forensic audit that spoke louder than any testimony. Quiet transfers, high-dollar consulting fees, paper trails between Diddy-owned companies and Lopez's brand entities on dates that just happened to align with settlement silences, vanished footage, and lawsuits that never made it past threats. One internal memo hit like a grenade. 5 words, buried in corporate code, handled quietly through her lane. Zero trace. Zero exposure. The prosecutor looked directly at the jury and said, "This is how silence works. Not with words, with networks, with money, with access." The jury froze. The gallery barely breathed. Even the defense stopped fidgeting. Then came the witness no one saw coming. A woman in her early 30s. Identity protected. Once a house manager at one of Diddy's infamous private retreats. Her voice was soft, but the truth underneath it was volcanic. She described a night Lopez arrived, not flashy, not loud, just her, a bodyguard, and a stylist, straight to the studio room. Minutes later, Diddy followed, the hallway cleared. The blinds were drawn. She wasn't supposed to be near. She forgot her badge. She waited just around the corner. And then, she heard a line that changed everything. "If anything ever comes out, make sure I don't burn with you." Jennifer's voice. The courtroom recoiled, not theatrically, just enough that you could feel the floor shift. The defense rose, objected, and fought to bury it under legal technicalities. But the judge allowed it, and just like that, the veil collapsed. The texts, the meetings, the red-eye flights, the NDAs, the financial threads, the unspoken pacts. Jennifer Lopez wasn't just present in Diddy's world, she helped manage the fallout. She wasn't always the architect, but she was never just a bystander. And suddenly, the story wasn't about her dancing through danger. It was about her silence guiding others through it, safe, untouched, strategic. The judge leaned in. "This trial is not about fame," he said. "It's about responsibility, about what we choose to do and what we choose not to when we're standing in the presence of truth." The court adjourned. Jennifer didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked out. No applause. No headlines. Just the sound of footsteps against the marble, leaving behind a silence that had finally run out of room to hide. And outside, as reporters swarmed and headlines exploded, the world saw what the courtroom already knew. Jennifer Lopez wasn't on trial. But her silence was, and it told a story no one could ever unhear.